and gentlemen, class recording has started. So, good morning, everybody. As we just discussed, plan for today looks like this. We go down to the bottom, general plan for the day. First thing I wanted to do is I wanted to make you, show you guys an example of how to make graphs in Excel. Make sure that you guys are making them properly, labeling them the way they're supposed to be, etc., etc., etc. Then, wanted to go over some of the details for the lab report, just to make sure that you know. There's a couple of things that I changed from the sheet that I gave you yesterday to record your data, and then what it actually says online. So a couple of differences that I want to make sure that you were aware of. And the last thing for today, we're going to get started on our quote-unquote physics section and start talking about motion so that we know we did some measurements yesterday that relate to those topics. So we're going to start getting into those ideas, getting into those concepts so that you can start working on lab report stuff. Okay. Questions? Calendar. So yesterday you guys took data for your lab. There was a short little reading assignment that I would like you to look at, introducing you guys to a couple of topics dealing with motion, that being observing motion and speed and velocity. So if you didn't get a chance to look at that last night, do so over the next couple of days. Then today we'll get into position and displacement and distance traveled and talk about those words and what they mean and how they relate to motion that we did yesterday. A couple of questions from the book for the weekend. Then zooming ahead to Monday, we'll continue on with our look at motion, dealing with speed and velocities. We'll talk about that. A lot more in your book about speed and velocity than position and displacement. Tuesday of next week, you guys are going to go meet with guidance counselors down in the library to set up your Naviance accounts, and we'll explain more about that next week. It's something that you guys are going to use pretty much throughout high school. It's going to ultimately culminate with you applying for college and stuff like that, gathering information about college and applying for college, but we get you set up early because there's things that it can do for you sophomore year, junior year as well. Okay? Then next week, we'll be back on lab, do a couple more things with some motion analysis, and then next Friday, we'll introduce acceleration. At that point, we will have covered all the things that we need to cover for your lab report. So, lab report is going to be due on Tuesday, April 23rd. So it's a while, but right now you don't have enough information to write certain parts. You can work on things like procedures and data tables and the graphs, but things like lit review and conclusion statement, those might be tough to do because we haven't had all the information yet. Okay? Good there as far as the calendar goes for now? All right. First thing I wanted to do today was I wanted to make a sample graph for you guys so you know the procedure that you need to go through and what you need to do in order to make a graph. I can do it pretty fast, so I'm going to do a sample of it on the computer so you guys can see it up here. And then, well, like I said, I'm recording it, so if you need to go back and reference it, if you don't remember everything as we're going through it, that's fine, you can do that. Okay? Questions there? Okay, so first thing you need to do, you need to pull up some kind of graphing program, okay? No handwritten graphs on your lab reports. Some kind of graphing program. I'm going to use Excel because that's the program that I have access to, but if you use Apple or if there's some other graphing program that you have on your computer, all of them should be able to do these things. So, I've opened up Excel and it gives me this, okay? Before we can do anything in Excel, you've got to give Excel numbers to work with, data to work with. In your lab yesterday, you guys collected two kinds of data. You collected position data and you collected time data. Okay? I'm going to put two headings in here. So the first heading I'm going to put in, first I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see a little better. How's that? Is it a little better? Okay. I'll go a little more. All right. So I'm going to put in average time and then position. Notice, at this point, I haven't done any units or anything. Right now, this is just us keeping track of things that we've done, okay? So, for positions, I'm going to make this real easy. I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What do those mean? Actually, I'm going to go to this. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What do those mean? I don't know, because there's no units on it. But you know what? Excel doesn't care what they mean. Excel just worries about numbers. It has no idea what you're graphing. It just graphs numbers. Okay? So those would be, you would put in your actual positions that you measured into there. No units, just numbers. If you put units into that square with those numbers, Excel is going to get confused. Okay? So then, next, you have to put in the times. And just to make things easy for this graph, I'm going to put in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You would put in your times. Now, put in your average times. I don't need to see a graph of every single trial that you did. You took multiple trials to get averages to make sure that you were being accurate as far as repeating a measurement and getting the same numbers over and over again. That's what you were trying to do. But something important though, notice that I put time in the first column and position in the second column. That's important when Excel goes to make a graph. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to highlight the 12 squares that have numbers in them. I'm not going to highlight the words. Excel doesn't like to graph words, it likes to graph numbers. So I just highlighted the 12 squares that have my numbers in it. Then I'm going to go up to the top where it says Insert, and the bar up at the top will change, and in the middle section there's a whole bunch of different kinds of graphs. We are going to make a scatter graph because the little window shows up and you guys can't see it, but let me zoom in on it for you. If you're watching the recording, it won't zoom in, but it says insert a scatter chart, also known as an XY chart. This type of chart compares pairs of values. A scatter graph graphs one set of numbers versus another set of numbers. And that's what you want to do in your graph. Okay? A line graph will make a separate graph for time and a separate graph for position, and it will put two lines on your graph. You don't want that. You want one line on your graph, one that's comparing time and position. Okay? So you're going to go up to the top, scatter, and if you click that, a bunch of different options will show up. And we're going to pick the one that just has dots, okay? So it should show up just as 6 dots when I click it, and boom, there it is, okay? Now, because of the numbers that I picked, my graph comes out looking pretty straight, okay? One of your graphs should come out looking pretty straight. The other one shouldn't look so straight, okay? But for now, let's talk about what we're going to do with this graph, okay? This graph is not complete, right? Lots of things that we need to put on it. What's one thing that we need to put on this graph? Nico? A title. What else do we need to put on this graph?
Labels, like for the axes.
Labels for the axes and stuff like that. And then there's one more thing that it says in your directions. What else do you got to put on this graph? What? Line of best fit, which Excel calls something different, but it's the same idea. Okay? So, first thing, once you have a graph that pops up, you'll notice up here at the top part, there's a green bar. It says Chart Tools. The one that's in the middle, it says Layout. That's where you're going to find all the things to make your graph look the way you want it to look. Okay? I know it's kind of small for you guys to see in class, but here, I'll zoom in a little bit. Up at the top, you'll see that there are things like Chart Title, Axis titles, and then you can do some other things with it as well. Okay, so let's go here. Okay, let's zoom back out. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put in a chart title. Okay, so there's a couple different options. I like the one that says above chart because when I click it, you'll see that it kind of puts it there and smushes the chart down and doesn't have words running over your data. That's what I like. I think it just makes it look better. Okay, so what would be an appropriate chart title here? Okay, so.
It's position versus time of a card.
Okay, one thing we really want to make sure, okay, make sure that your chart title describes what's in the chart, okay? Don't just put motorized car, right? That's not what's on this chart. This chart is time versus position for a motorized car. Make sure that you describe what's on the chart. So once this comes up here in this box, you can just highlight it, and then I'll go position versus time for a motorized car. Okay? All right, so there's my chart title. Craft, we said what else do we need?
Axis labels.
Okay. Up at the top, there is a box that says axis titles. If you click it, it says horizontal axis or vertical axis. We'll start with the horizontal axis. There's option for none, and then there's one for title below axis. That's the one we want, and then we put that in, okay? The reason why I put my data in with time in the first column and position in the second column is because Excel, by default, puts things that are in the first column on the x-axis and puts things that are in the second column on the y-axis by default. You can change it manually, but it's a little more complicated. It's easier if you just put the numbers in this way, at least where you guys are at this point, okay? So, that being said, what's on the x-axis of my graph?
Average time.
Average time, okay? So we can, instead of putting average time, we can just call that time, okay? So we got time, but what's time measured in? Seconds, or at least you guys measured it in seconds. So make sure that you put a unit in there just like that, okay? So I've got time in seconds on my x-axis, okay? Then I'm going to go back up to the one that says axis titles. Now I'm going to work on my vertical axis. I like the one that says rotated title. It just puts the title on the side like this, okay? You can put whatever, you can do whatever way you want to. I like this one. You don't have to use this one if you don't want to. That being said, based on the way that I put my data in my chart, what's on my y-axis? Are you guys watching? Yeah. So what's on the y-axis? Position's on the y-axis, right? Devin, what do we measure position in?
Meters.
Okay, position should be measured in meters. Now, some of you may not have measured position in meters, and some of you may misspell position, so fix that. Okay? If you didn't measure position in meters, okay, fine. If you measured it in centimeters, that's really easy to fix. If you measured it in feet, not ideal, but put it in the way you have it. Okay? Good there? Okay, so we've got axis labels, we've got a title for our graph, okay? Up in the top, over here on the side, this is called the legend. It's just telling you what the data is representing. If you only have one line on your graph, there's really no reason to leave that in there. Your title should tell you what it means. So I'm going to go up to the top where it says legend and then say none. And then it'll get rid of it and it'll just show my numbers like that. Okay? Good so far? All right. Macy, last thing we need? Line of best fit. Okay? There's a couple different ways you can do this. I liked it this way because it lets you do more than one thing at once. Okay? If I go to any of the dots that I just plotted and right-click, this list will show up. And at the bottom of this list, there is one, it's one up from the bottom, it says Add Trend Line. If you click that, this window will come up, and it says, zoom in a little here for you, it says Format Trend Line. Okay? Like I said, there are other ways to do this. This is the way I like to do it just because it lets you do more than one thing at once. Okay? So, here at the top, there's a bunch of different kinds of trend lines that you can put in based on the kind of data that you have. Looking at our graph, this one's pretty much what? That one was pretty straight, right? So this one's going to be a linear. And if you look on the back of your lab or in the details for the lab report that is that show up online, it tells you what kind of trend lines to put in. Okay? So we're going to keep this one as linear. But then, down here at the bottom, there is a box that says Display Equation on Chart. Let's check that. Okay? Why do we make graphs out of stuff in general? Here.
To show the data.
To show the data or show what about the data?
How it compares.
How it compares or how it's related, right? Okay? That's why, because it's a lot easier, it's generally easier to see that in a graph form than it is in a data table, right? But also, too, now, Beaver, if we know the relationship between the data points that we measured, what can we then do? prediction about a data point that we didn't actually measure, right? How many data points did we actually measure in this lab? 6, right? You got the beginning, right? And then, but the moral of the story, Nico, is not many, right? There's lots more positions that this car can go to and a lot more times that this car can go to that we didn't actually measure. But if we know the relationship between the variables, we can make a prediction about those places that we didn't actually measure. The equation of that line gives us a mathematical way that we can do that. So that's why we're going to click this here, display equation on chart, and when I hit close, right, you'll see that, I'll zoom this out a little bit, that now we have a line that is drawn in and an equation that goes along with that line. Okay? Now, my equation is not very exciting because of the data that I picked. All right? Your equation should be a little bit more exciting than that equation, and it's going to tell you some other things that we'll talk about more as we go along in this unit. Okay? But let's do this one last thing. Excel doesn't know that I graphed time values on the x-axis and position values on the y-axis. Yeah, I put the data labels in, but to Excel, it's just a bunch of numbers. So it makes all of its equations just generic y equals x equations, okay? Y and y-axis, x-axis. But on our chart, those y-axis and that x-axis mean something, right? What is the x-axis representing on our chart? Time. So when we go up here in this equation craft, right, instead of x, what could we put to make our equation a little bit more representative?
Time.
T, right? We can use, oh, not y, t. Okay?
You use S.
You could use, you could, although instead of using the units, like, yeah, you could use S, but generally we use T to represent time. We could measure time in a different unit. In this case, we're specifically measuring it in seconds, but more generally, it's time. Does that make sense? Okay. And then on the y-axis, what are we representing? Position, which we could also sort of say is distance, right? Okay. We'll learn that those aren't. We'll learn here that those aren't exactly the same things later on today. Okay. But to make this graph a little bit more representative, we'll delete the y and make it a d. So d is equal to t because, like I said, it took 1 second to go 1 meter, 2 seconds to go 2 meters. Because of the numbers that I picked, those are real easy. Okay? Good there? All right. Once you save this, okay, this graph can be a picture that you put into your lab report. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do. So if we open up a Word document, okay, I'm just going to open up just a blank one. Okay? That's not what I wanted. So, oh, you guys are zoomed in here. You're seeing weird. Seeing only part of the screen. Okay. So I'm just going to open up a new blank document. Okay. Once I've made this graph, I can just copy it and paste it here into my Word document, and now it's a picture in your lab report. Okay? So you can show me those graphs right in your lab report, then talk about them afterwards, like it says in your lab report details. Okay? Good there? All right. One thing that needs to change. If you flip over to the back of the sheet that I gave you yesterday, the one that says making time position graphs. If you go to the back of that sheet, there's a section that says graphical analysis, okay? And it says graph both sets of data on the same axis. I'm not going to have you do that, okay? I want you to make 2 separate graphs. One for the car, one for the ball, all right? So don't put both sets of data on the same axis, all right? Make 2 separate graphs, 2 separate trend lines. It just makes your life a lot easier. Good there? Questions? Okay, that's how you make an Excel graph for your lab, and then a couple of changes that go along with it. Okay? Good there? Anything else you want to know about your lab report before we move on to the next part. Correct.
Is all the like requirements, are they all on the
Yeah, if you go to the calendar, and then on yesterday's date, there's 2 links. The first one says lab report details. It gives you this sheet, very similar to what we've had. You know, look at the things in red. Those are the things that apply specifically to this lab, okay? And then the other link is the rubric, which looks real similar to the rubrics that we've had up until this point. Okay. Other questions relating to the lab report? Like I said before, at this point, you guys probably don't have enough information to do the literature review or the analysis question or the conclusion statement, but you can start working on procedures, you can start working on data and observations, you can work on the graphs, all that kind of stuff, so you can get those things taken care of, and then when you get all the information, just do the last part. Okay. Good? All right.